What would it look like to slash churn, scale retention, and supercharge upsells? It's what most companies say they want, and at least in some cases believe they have a handle on. Now, in my experience, and a little bit of digging into the reasons why often reveals a different picture. Our guest today is a two-time SaaS founder who has attacked this very problem in his previous business and is now helping others solve the same problem for themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutworth.com. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest today is Manasij Ganguli. He's the founder and CEO of Zapscale, which helps B2B SaaS companies to retain their customers, kill churn, and deliver high upsells through its 42 out-of-the-box health KPIs that deliver the deepest customer and user health management. I believe Zapscale also automates the customer service operations through its 50 out-of-the-box CS playbooks and delivers a one-day onboarding into the Zapscale success tool. Curious, Manasij, as to, was there a particular incident or experience with your former company that triggered this whole journey into creating what is now Zapscale?
Thanks. First of all, Vinay, thanks a lot for having me on your podcast. It's really great to be here. No, there's no real one incident. It's like there's no Boston Tea Party, which really led to the whole revolution, really. What happened was a gradual process. When you run your SaaS business, you realize that retaining customers is an extremely important exponent of really making a successful business. And it's mostly a hidden trial. What is health for your customers and how do you measure it for your business? It was an uphill task for us for like almost 4 years before we started to zero down on the most important aspects, which would tell us if a customer is really happy or healthy, likely to retain or churn, expand or adopt. So these were some of the things that we basically trialed and errored a lot for 4 years of our business. And that finally got us to a point where we had some semblance of understanding of what these things were. Now, if it took me 4 years, I'm assuming for a smart person out there, it would take it around 2.5 or maybe a year and a half. But that's still a lot of time, right? If you spend a year and a half of your business spinning wheels and not making real progress, is there a way to short circuit that entire journey and make it more easily accessible to people so that they can look into their care metrics, like churn, adoption, retention, and expansion? So our objective is basically that no one should have to go through all of this hassles that we went through ourselves. And that basically kept me away from my family and my vacations. I'm basically trying to make sure that people get to that nirvana much more quicker. So basically, it's 4 years of toil for us, which we're right now trying to compress into something which people can use and benefit from that rather than having to go through the whole cycle themselves. So no Boston Tea Party, it's a long-term process which we realized in trying to solve for that right now.
Sure. And given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
Why don't you define the question a little bit more for me to latch on to the best possible way I would like to take this question?
Another way of putting it might be, what would you consider to be your superpower?
I would have loved invisibility for sure, or having to shoot ray guns from my eyes. I look at me and my team, of course, and I speak for myself, I'm not only speaking myself, but also for my team. We're very scientific and analytical beings. So for us, everything has to be broken down into numbers and figures, which is scientifically arrived at, statistically provable, and if possible, expressible in a machine learning version. So we are from the perspective of doing things, we're very number oriented, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah.
So we've tried to break down the whole thing into a number oriented process, even in Zapscale.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know?
In my own experience of looking at customer success as a space, I look at a lot of CS people who do have some exposure to technology for sure, but they might not always have a deep-rooted background in statistical analysis and mathematical analysis and stuff. Now, the problem is, if you look into customer success as a discipline, it's basically about health management of your customers, preventive and curative both. And now you look back into the preventive and curative medicine, it's replete with statistical analyses, mathematical perspectives, which is basically then expressed back for the doctors and physicians to make accurate diagnosis for predictive and curative processes. Now, do we find the exact kind of similarities in the CS space? The answer is probably no. Even though there are absolutely fantastic people out there for CS and the space has moved leaps and bounds, I would still assume that the mathematical and scientific rigor that's required to figure out the deep intricacies of these problems is probably still lacking a bit. So therefore, there is a space for taking that kind of an analytical approach to solving these problems and helping people so that they don't have to go back and invent the wheel every time.
Certainly. I'm also curious, success and success programs in organizations, not something new. People have been talking about it for a few years at the very least. If it's meant to look at the whole idea of being preventative and curative from a retention perspective, it should certainly make sense. How would you say, though, it has evolved from what was traditionally seen as a service or a support function?
CS in some form and shape always existed. It was we call account management in the olden days. And of course, Gainsight came into the picture and said, hey, you know what, let's just find a new good term for it, which made absolute sense. So of course, it was there. The thing that is important to understand is what is the nature of the business? What are we trying to do as customer success executives and folks out there? We're basically trying to latch on to various available signals that our customers are leaving as breadcrumbs along their journey with us. Mm-hmm. And from that breadcrumbs, we're trying to figure out if this customer has the propensities and the proclivities that expresses the significant telltale marks of a possible churn or an adoption problem or a retention problem or an expansion opportunity, right? These are the four basic tenets that we're trying to do here. And again, I would like to underscore the fact that it's been around for a while. It's just the fact that we're starting to build the whole math and science around the whole discipline so that it can be then administered to our customers. So at the heart of it, Vinay, this is basically a problem of healthcare. And I like to always go back and draw down inspirations from the existing healthcare model that exists in different hospitals and the modern medicine to basically come back and say, what are we exactly following that track that these guys have set up for 200 years or so? Or are we trying to do it in some very different way? And to me, it seems like we are in a juncture, customer success is now in a juncture where you're starting to see a lot of organization trying to build mathematical expressions to basically come down to a number through which you are able to get to the customer's health and thereby understand if your customer is likely to have a churn problem or a retention issue or problems in adoption, or there are opportunities for expansion. So that's why I call them the CARE metrics, C-A-R-E, right? Churn, adoption, retention, expansion. That's where it's been around for a while. It just needs a little bit more of a scientific rigor that's I'm sure it's going to happen as part of natural progress in the whole space. We're trying to create one pebble in that whole mausoleum, so to speak.
Okay, I'd like to unpack that a little more. Now, it's interesting that you use healthcare as a parallel, if you will, to this whole idea of customer success. Now, the idea of healthcare, at least the layperson, would mean that as a medical professional, perhaps an organization, you're invested in the overall health of an individual and therefore recommend steps to improve their health or intervene to take corrective measures if need be. From a customer success perspective, it's one thing to look at success from the perspective of you as an organization, in that you want the customer to stay with you for the long term, as opposed to their overall well-being, which may not necessarily mean that they need to stay with your organization for the long term. So I just want to unpack that or tease that out a little bit. Are you suggesting that perhaps we should look at the customer holistically and quite separate from any potential vested interest in what we offer as a solution to them and just be like an advisor to them? Or should it very much be focused on the service and the value that we are able to establish with this customer, both now and potentially for the long term?
Yes, let me try to dig a little bit on that and give you my perspective on this. Most of the writing that you would see online right now on LinkedIn or blog channels and stuff for customer success is very skewed towards the enterprise customers. The customers who are really large, really big.
Yeah.
So you would see a lot of content about how customer success people should have a personal rapport with the customer, reaching out to the other side of the fence where you know exactly who is your deal champion, knowing more about them, figuring out, stalking them, all the stuff around that, wishing them happy birthday, sending them gifts on their anniversary, stuff like that, even to that extent. Okay, but that's not the only world we live in, right? Enterprise is only a very small segment of customer success. There's a whole mid-market segment where one customer success person is actually taking care of 40, 50 accounts. Now, you know what, when you start to take care of 40, 50 accounts, you possibly cannot go back and track each of their birth dates and their anniversaries and have a personal rapport or a relationship there actually. So now you need something more than just a personal touch to make sure if you know about your customers well. Then you come down to the rungs to the SMB segment when one customer success person is now handling 300, 400, 500 accounts. Now, you can absolutely kiss goodbye all the writings that you see online because they just cannot work for this guy at all. So how do we work for this whole chain up and down the order? So my perspective of that, Vinay, is that, okay, yes, let's agree that for enterprise customers, when you're talking about $1 million plus deals, yes, you absolutely need to know everything about a customer in person. So there's a yin and a yang. There's, of course, mathematical and analytical understandings, which we need to bring in the table. But of course, it has to be supplemented by the customer success team's own initiatives of knowing the customers, knowing the deal champions, and all that shebang that comes along with that enterprise customers, which we completely understand. And it's not new, as I mentioned before, it's part of the account management strategy, which has been around for decades. Now, when you come to mid-market and SMB segments, you cannot do the same process anymore because it's just not feasible. I mean, one CS person cannot look into 50, 60, 100 people, 200 people and know about them personally to have that personal rapport and everything. Now you have to come down to more of a number-oriented perspective. So what I find is that all the CS space, all the noise and all the blogs and the discussions are very skewed on this side because, you know what, all the companies who started first, of course, went for the most mature enterprise customers. So all the first generation CS thought leaders have always obsessed and focused about the enterprise side of the business, which is fantastic. But then there is a large market for SMB and mid-market as well. So how do we tackle these guys? So for tackling these people, the only way I can think of is basically you must have a process to filter down all the noise that your customers are leaving in different places. Now, just to give you a perspective here, Vinay, and I know this is a long answer, please hold on with me for a couple of minutes. So what are my customers' breadcrumbs that I'm trailing right now, okay? So my customers are, of course, doing stuff on my product. There is definite evidence of what they're doing there. We need to definitely track that. My customers' data is also in my CRM product. So that's another piece of information which we need to look into. My customers would always send tickets to me that, hey, these are the problems, the issues I'm facing. That's very important data points. You like it or not, customers are going to ask for more features. So like kids want candy, customers want more features. So that part of our business, we can never wish it away. So features are very important. Number 5, hopefully your customers will be making payments to you. So the payments and invoices are an extremely important part of your health metric. Then your customers have comms with you, like they write emails to you, or maybe they're talking to you on Slack or Gong or those channels. And then of course, there is this whole concept of customers giving you an NPS. And finally, you have your CS team's own perspectives about that customer. So there are 8 different sources that we need to capture: product, CRM, ticketing, features, emails, invoices, meetings, and your CS team's perspectives. Now, capture these all different 8 kinds of breadcrumbs and then put them into a package where now I can see and say, you know what, Vinay does not look very good in these departments, and let's actually set up Vinay on this antibiotic course so that I can actually get him to become healthy. That's exactly what we're trying to do in CS. And we're trying to make it more scientifically validated rather than having to do the age-old process of trying to know each customer. You need to know each customer, but not personally, actually. You need to know their data points so that you can have a very clear view of what's wrong with them without having to really know about their wife's birth date and their dog's name. That's what I'm suggesting here, basically.
That's a really interesting perspective. I guess someone listening to this would go, Manasij, that's interesting and certainly useful data. But here's the thing, a lot of the information, by the time I get it in terms of a number or whatever else that you might provide, it's a lagging indicator of where they were as opposed to where they are. And quite frankly, for me as maybe a CS manager or a CS professional, I'd rather be dealing with information that is current, both for them as well as usable for me. Does what you're talking about and perhaps your platform address this issue of having near real-time or real-time?
That's a really great question and something that the whole industry has grappled with for a very long time. Which of these indicators is leading or lagging? Now, again, hopefully I'll not be lynched for saying this, but the whole concept of doing an NPS or a CSAT, customer satisfaction survey, is basically very lagging in nature. The customer has already decided that I don't like you. And then they will go and give you an NPS survey. So when you roll out that NPS survey or a CSAT survey, you're always latching onto a signal, which is always a lagging indicator. But if I latch on to indicators like, hey, what is the current today's of my customers' product usage? And then look back at the last, let's say, 1 quarter, and then paint it into a kind of an adoption curve. I'm not talking about a very leading indicator that, in the last 1 quarter, I can see my customer either accelerating the whole adoption, or it's laying flat, or it's like going down, or it's like up and down zigzag. So if it's laying flat or it's going up, it's still all right, great. Going up is best, laying flat is okay. But if it's zigzag or it's going down, then you have a very clear leading indicator that there's something wrong with this customer. Now you can exactly extrapolate the same semantic into your ticketing performance, into your feature request performance, your communication performance, your performance with invoices and meetings. And now you have a system which basically is showing you the trend line of your customer as they do it on a daily basis. So that starts to give you a perspective of where it is. And then what you do here, Vinay, is you feed this data into a very neat machine learning model. It's exactly what we do. And we look into this and say, okay, do I find any of these trend lines showing me propensities and proclivities of a possible churn? It's exactly like what doctors do in a hospital. If you put a guy on an oxygen mask on in a critical care unit, and that person's oxygen count is going down every week, the doctors should be worried, because that's a sure sign of this person probably not going to survive. What you do is, so therefore that's a leading indicator that, this is possibly not going to go down. Now, if you do the exact same thing with, let's say, usage data or ticketing data or feature request data or communication data or meeting data, product usage data, you now start to have a machine learning based output, which tells you, what, Vinay's organization is showing 3 signs of possible churn out of 7 or 8 that we have already pre-planned for our machine learning. Vinay's organization is showing that there is a large scale problem of adoption. It's up and down, never settling into an envelope of, can be certainly confident about the whole thing. So there's a problem there. The tickets show a continuous rise, which means the customer's temperature of seeing issues with my product is certainly not solving itself, it's going up. And I am seeing there are lots of issues with the customer paying me on time, not on a monthly cadence, but it's always late or always. So basically now I have got 3 leading indicators that, if not solved, will eventually go down to the path of taking Vinay's organization to a churn candidate. So what we're trying to do here, we're trying to do basically taking care of the indicators that are something that's touched by the customer on a daily basis, but not necessarily they're reporting back to you. So that's what happens. You got to look into these tacit breadcrumbs that customers are leaving along their journey, and then put them into sort of a trend line. And then you send this trend line into machine learning to see what trend lines are actually problematic, what trend lines are actually good for me, what trend lines are showing me possibilities of churn, possibilities of renewals or retention issues, adoption issues, and expansion opportunities. So that's the part of the whole problem here, Vinay.
So if I understand this correctly, it really boils down to observing behaviors of the client, understanding those behaviors and putting them into a model, which is what AI or machine learning aided in order to provide prescriptive actions. Okay, so that would entail not just the math side of it, but there's a certain science as well to understanding the kind of behaviors that your customers exhibit. What do we need to know? Because people may have been using this, may have been approaching customer success more through gut feel more than anything else, perhaps some numbers to look at, or the CSAT score, NPS, etc. But now that you've talked about this whole idea of bringing things to real time and being able to chart out the potential outcomes that customers will take from a psychology or neuroscience perspective, but what are the things that we need to understand?
Yeah, I'm not a psychology or neuroscience expert at all. I'm going to stick to what I know, what I understand best. Look, this problem you're talking about, like, why is finding out health of customers so hard? And the reason is, if you look back in the current wisdom, and again, I hope I'm not going to be lynched for saying this. Again, this is part of, I've seen it again and again, that when you go and ask a customer success person that, okay, let's talk about ticketing. Like, we need to figure out if my customer is happy with the ticketing performance that we're providing them. Like, the customers writing me tickets, we're solving them, resolving them at times. Are they happy about it? How do CS people attack this problem? And you would find, when there's one very strong school of thought, which basically likes to put it this way, that, okay, if my customer in 1 month reports, say, 5 tickets or less, they're happy. If the customer reports between 5 and 10 tickets in a month, they're okay. And if they report more than 10 tickets a month, they're doing really poor. Okay. Now, the question that should be always asked just right at the moment is that, okay, what is the backing data based on which you have made this assumption or conclusion? Have we actually done a correlation analysis that every customer who has logged more than 10 tickets or more has actually shown us real intent of churn? If they have not, then yes, the KPI you just built looks mathematical or scientific, but it's based on just guesswork, my friend. So what happens after 3 months? You would very much doubt that particular KPI. And then what you will do is you will ignore those, and you will default back into your gut feel and intuition based handling of the customer, which at the first place you wanted to avoid. Right. So what should we do about this problem? All right. Like, I'm going to take the ticketing as an example to build on that, right? Let's see what's the real problem with tickets. Why are my customers logging tickets with me? Of course, they're not logging tickets with me because there is snow on my doorstep or there's a water main burst somewhere. Pretty much the reason has to be that there is something gone wrong with their product experience or the experience that they have with me, with my teams and stuff. So basically rooted in my solution, right? So let's look into that. So let's imagine, again, I'm going to take an example for me to explain this whole thing, and then we can bring on this home, hopefully this whole thought to home. So imagine when I have 2 customers, right? Customer A and customer B. Customer A is logging 10 tickets with me per month, right? And customer B is logging 20 tickets with me per month. Now, who is unhappy? And for a moment, assume all the tickets are of same priority, right? So is customer A unhappy or customer B unhappy? Now, if we ask the current wisdom that's out there, when we basically, what we do is we just look into the number of tickets and say, you know what, if it's less than 5, it's very good. Between 5 and 10 is okay. More than 10, very bad. Customer A is logged 10 tickets, so they will be okay. And customer B, who was logged 20 tickets, will be called bad. Really, let's just dig down 1 more level from here. Customer A has used your product for 10 hours. Okay, grand total in last 1 month. And customer B has used your product a grand total of 200 hours. Okay, now, which means that customer A has logged 10 tickets in 10 hours of usage. So for every hour of usage, customer A has logged 1 ticket with you. That's the amount of problem they're facing with the product. Customer B has used your product for 200 hours and they've logged only 20 tickets. So they're logging 1 ticket for 10 hours of usage. Now, the moment you break this down into this, it's absolutely clear. Customer A is screaming and writhing in pain because for every hour of usage, they're logging one ticket. Customer B has, of course, logged more tickets, that's correct, but they have logged tickets at a 10 times rate slower than the customer A. So now you have a very mathematical perspective to look into this problem. Now what we do is, so now we know that customer A is requiring our attention, so we should go and focus our attention there. So our objective here, Vinay, is to basically go and dig deeper and not create this scientific looking, but very much conjecture driven health KPIs and metrics is right now rife in the market, but to create stuff which gives customer success people real power to understand the root causes of the problems and therefore attack and solve those as you go along the journey. And the last part here, Vinay, I'm just going to bring the holistic home. I've been speaking for a long time. The last part is now, once I have done these analysis and tickets, again, let's stick to tickets for taking this example. Now, when I look into this, how do I know if my customer is likely to churn? So what we do is, anytime we see a churn happening, let's say we see 5 customers churn in different places. What we can do is we can model the churn behavior of these 5 customers and see, was there a specific telltale mark? Let's say the tickets for the churn customers continuously kept going up. Let's just say, for example, the machine learning draws the analysis that, okay, if any time a customer shows an upward swing in number of tickets per hour of usage, of course, then we should consider that as a possible churn candidate. And then if you take any reference customer's behavior and then model it and say, is this model and the churn model that we have derived are congruent? And if they are, then we may have a case where this customer is likely exhibiting propensities and proclivities of a possible churn. So let's go and solve that. That's basically the whole part of it. And the whole thing is, I don't want the CS folks to go blind trying to create these KPIs. I don't have to go and define my health metrics when I go visiting a hospital. The doctor already knows what are the things that I need to be measured on. I just need to give him a blood sample, go home. Tomorrow morning, I'll get my analysis. Similarly, we have tried to build something in Zapscale so that you as a CS person don't have to go and build all these deeper mathematical analysis. It's already pre-built. All you have to do is plug in your channels of data, plug in your product, plug in your CRM, plug in your ticketing features, invoice, emails, and that's it. We should be able to give you the entire perspective of what's wrong, and then give you the possible candidates who are churning or retention issues or possible upsell issues and stuff like that. So that's basically the crux of what we're trying to solve here with the mathematical perspective. Rather than making it conjecture driven, we're trying to make it very scientific in approach.
Terrific. And now that we understand, I guess, where a customer stands at any point in time, we want to build on their experience with us. How does that occur? I believe you talk about playbooks to kind of standardize the experience and make it more in sync with your brand. Your platform does offer some playbooks to start with, build on, as I understand this. What is it that we need to understand about playbooks? Because different customers, different sizes, different backgrounds and information that come in from sales, etc., can seem quite a complex mess. And yet the idea of a playbook would suggest a degree of simplicity as well. How do you correlate the two?
I'm going to again go back and pick up in parallel from the world of medicine. If I go to my doctor today saying, hey, you know what, I'm exhibiting 101 fever, what do I do? My doctor will most possibly start me on a course of paracetamol. You know what, you start this course and then we will investigate further. So if the KPI is fever and the number is more than 100 degrees is bad for you, then the playbook is paracetamol. All right. That's how medicine treats us. Now, if the problem is tickets and the number of tickets is high, what should be the playbook to address that problem? So what we have done here is what any thinking being would do is that if you create KPIs, like these are my health KPIs for measuring my customers' health, you are bound to ask yourself the next follow-up question that what happens if my customer exhibits bad health? What do I do about that? And you know what? It will generically and very organically flow into playbooks. that, okay, if my customer exhibits this problem, I should do that. So what happens is, what we are trying to do is we've tried to model. So we cannot talk about playbooks without talking about the health KPI. So what we have done is from product, CRM, ticketing, features, emails, invoices, meetings, and your customer success's own experience. There are 8 kinds of data. We have synthesized 40-point health check for every customer and every user. That's what we do. And then for every 40-point health check that we have put together, we also think of the exception cases. What happens if my customer happens to land in the unhealthy bucket? What am I going to do with that? That is what takes us to the playbooks. That if a customer shows fever, let's put them onto paracetamol course. If a customer shows very strong propensity of churn because of their ticketings going up, let's immediately sit down and understand with the deal champion and my support head and my product head to understand what exactly is going wrong so that I can go and solve that problem. That's the playbook that you would want to trigger. So what we have is basically a whole bunch of curated playbooks for the KPIs. You cannot talk about playbooks without talking about the KPIs. So these 40 health checkpoints tell you what's wrong with the customer on a daily basis. And these health checks trigger the playbook so that you can actually put the customer on the track of making them healthier. That's the generic perspective here.
Very interesting, because my takeaway from what you're saying is you're really putting analytics and prescriptions to what I would call human-centered design around a customer journey or experience, which I think is quite interesting, because I think for most organizations, there are probably 5 key books or areas that they would think about. One being your partnership kickoff, onboarding, of course, a review process at some stage, a declining health score, but you've taken it to a new level, and of course renewals and upsells. But you're really going much broader than that in order to create an element of what I would call human-centered design. And I say that because the numbers are great, but without empathy and compassion, it's hard to connect with the customer in a way that is meaningful and helpful, really, or valuable to them. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. This gentleman, Nate Silver, who came into the prominence because he read all the 50 primaries in 2008 correctly, I wrote a very lovely book called Signals and Noises. And in that book, he mentioned that, there should be a lot of scientific rigor for data analysis and understanding those pictures, but it is always incomplete without the human intuition. So the human intuition basically is a very strong picture of what is good, bad, ugly going on in our lives, right? So if you don't take the human intuition into account, you're basically saying that I'm going to be fighting my battle with only one sword, one hand. One sword is fine, good enough, probably. The point is, yes, we do want to add in the human element of the whole interactions for sure. I'm not saying that we're going to be completely detached. It'll be a robot doing everything and CS people can absolutely go home. There's no way you cannot have good CS people in your business. We have very modern aircrafts flying us all the way through, but guess what? You need a very competent, qualified pilot at the cockpit as well. So yes, you absolutely need high quality CS people who have the empathy, who have the understanding, and who know those neural pathways to elicit those responses from the customers, which otherwise dumb systems can never find. That's a given. Let me be very clear and upfront saying you always need great CS people, but you need great CS people to give them with the telemetry that a good pilot receives from the cockpit, right? The pilot receives a whole bunch of data about where the flight is. What's the pitch angle? What's the roll angle? Is it the flight maintaining good altitude? Is the flight maintaining good airspeeds? We need to have that telemetry built in so that the pilot can really do his job well. So what all we are saying is the intuition, the empathy that the CS people bring in, we factor that in as a KPI first of all. So that input is always counted, and you can always amp up the weight of that KPI corresponding to every other KPI if you like. But also, other than just the KPI piece of it, what happens when you get that problem playbook that, okay, yes, my customer is exhibiting problems with tickets. Now, the next step of action is to actually sit down and understand with your customer, with your support head, with your product head. That cannot happen without a person who is smart. And you therefore always need that, the guy who leads the whole CS initiative with empathy, understanding. Those things there is no substitute for a great CS person. Zapscale is never going to replace a CS person. It's going to just make their lives easier, just like a cockpit makes the life of a good pilot's flying abilities better. That's all it is.
Would you say that it also speaks to the larger issue of perhaps having the right culture? It's not just about let's keep the customer for as long as possible in order to just improve our profits, but to really invest in the customer and ensure that their success is genuinely brought about beyond just the profit side of things.
In SaaS, these two things are very much hand in glove. It's a high LTV business. In SaaS, basically, we only make money from a customer when the customer stays with us for 3, 4, 5 years.
Sure. Yeah.
For the CAC is already so high, the cost of acquiring customers is so high that 1 year journey is not going to cut it because LTVs are not going to make it for us. So look, this is very much the part of the whole process. So I completely agree with you. And that's the way I think everybody in the CS community is trying to build stuff or create processes through which you can not only just look at the profit objective, but as a cultural perspective of your organization. Your organization exists because of your customers, right? Everything else that's out there is essentially serving for that specific goal. So I fully agree with your process. I also think that customer success is like of a quarter. So you are the center of the whole attention. You may not always be the last person scoring for the team, but you would be passing the ball to the right places to make it happen. So for example, in the case we took, the customer has a problem with ticketing. Of course, the CS team would not roll up their sleeves and go and solve the tickets themselves. It will always be done by the support team and of course with the help of the product team and the technical team. But there is a problem and there's a whole organization-wide appreciation and understanding of that problem is only possible because of a culture where the customer success is at the forefront of the whole picture. I fully agree. I hope that's how the world turns out because SaaS is a kind of business which actually forces you to think like that.
Again, thanks for building on that insight. And you said something very interesting. You made a reference to CS being like that of a quarterback. I would use another term, say playmaker in his role. That's an interesting thought because I was thinking quite often in many conversations I've heard of sales being the generator of the revenue, etc. And then of course we hand it over to CS or account managers to take care of the business. And in a lot of cases, from a customer's point of view, there's a dissonance in their experience because the experience with sales is of one kind. And then they go into this handoff and it's almost like a different kind of experience. And if we are to get culture and ensure that brand experiences are the same across the board, is there a conversation that increasingly needs to be had where CS is as much a part of sales as part of the whole customer service and retention side of things as well?
It's something I struggled a lot in my last SaaS business. The problems that the CS teams could see all the various problems that our customers had. The problem is when they went to discuss it with, say, the support team or the sales team or the marketing team or the tech team, the other teams would never respond back with the same keel because they have no visibility of these problems. And let's go back to what your last point was like, how do you build that culture so that these handoffs and these things do not feel like two foreign entities, but like one complete amalgamated, integrated business? The answer to that is CS is not just CS team's problem. The CS can never solve the product problems, the support problems, or the problems that the customer has for invoicing and payments or feature requests and stuff. So it is going to be passed on to somebody else for them to go and attack the problem. The issue is that the other teams like sales teams, support teams, tech teams, marketing teams, these teams have no view of these CS problems. And this has been typically kept in these silos because if you go back to the current tools that are right now out there in the market, they always charge you for the number of seats you bring into the product. So if I want to have 10 seats on my CS tool, I have to pay, say, $100 per month. But if I want to have 40 seats, I have to pay $4,000 per month. So that basically, you are disincentivizing the culture building of CS by making it per seat. So that allows that information silos will always exist. The sales team will never empathize with CS and everybody else will not similarly. It's important to have that cohesive perspective where everybody has the view of CS, because at the end of the day, the product team is building the product for the customers. And if they're not seeing the customer issues, then there is something wrong with the organization's culture at the heart of it. And it just exacerbates when you have these kind of problems. Like, hey, I did not know this was an issue. I never knew. So to my best understanding, I would always recommend that all the departmental heads and important people at a decision-making matrix in an organization must have a view in the CS part. And the CS tools should never charge based on number of seats. It's actually a way, sure shot way to make sure that the information silos will exist forever. The only way you need to make CS work is if you can get the whole village on the whole platforms and making sure everybody can see the problems and empathize and therefore build the solutions for them.
As a key takeaway, I would be thinking that at an executive level, there needs to be someone representing CS on that leadership table in order to accurately reflect the needs that impact sales, marketing, etc. Would that be a fair takeaway?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, the executive level is working for the customers.
Yeah.
There has to be some voice in that table from the CS. Absolutely agreed.
Just another question before we start to wrap up. At that level, would you say that CS is almost another way of representing the company's brand? And could that title be almost equivalent to like brand manager?
I mean, brand manager, I'm not very good with the marketing part of it. So I think the brand manager builds up an image of somebody who's trying to create a marketing process for it. But I agree on the philosophical part of what you just mentioned. So yes, look, customer success is the reason why your business will succeed. All right. So in a way, we are all subservient to that specific goal of making our customers happier, healthier, and from there the whole business goes forward. And that's your brand story, really. So yeah, wow, man, let's call it whatever, but definitely pay a lot of attention to it. That'll be great to do.
This has been very enlightening. Manasij, if I could ask this question, are there a couple of aspects or issues, if you will, around this whole idea of building customer success programs that you feel doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
I think there is very little airtime available for, as I mentioned, mid-market and SMB part of the customer success. It's very skewed in the enterprise side. Like I mentioned, people have to, like, it's all yin, there's no yang to it. It's like, let's just focus on the customers' birthdays, their kids' birthdays, their dogs' names and stuff, and know them personally, have that. That's great for enterprise businesses. That's not going to cut ice when your CS has to handle 50 customers. One person has 50 customers or 200 customers. In that case, you need broad spectrum mathematical structures to work it through. So that space has not been explored very well. I'm assuming as and when we see more interesting organizations tackling these problems, you would see more mathematics and more deep-rooted machine learning-based systems taking over, rather than having that, let's just focus on the humans angle of it only. So, that would be one. And second part, I think gets a very little airtime is, what is health? Really, that, like, for example, if you go back and ask what is health for your liver or your kidneys or your heart, you would see very clearly the 25, 30 KPIs on which your liver health or your kidney health or your heart health is measured at. What are the 5 KPIs for ticketing health? And then all hell breaks loose, because this part is not answered. And I really want to address this piece in the next couple of years, because that's the cornerstone of our business. Zapscale exists because we want to take away that whole problem of what is health question into the product itself, so that the CS team can focus into execution rather than getting into data sciences and all those murky parts of mathematical, statistical, machine learning models and stuff. That's what it is. So these two things, I think, require more careful deliberations, considerations, writings, and far more airtime than they have been given till date.
Brilliant. And if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I would probably go back and ask my CS team that, hey guys, what is health that we have defined? And please tell me that your health definition is not based on if it's less than 5, then it's good. If between 5 and 10 is okay and more than 10 is bad, because If you have that, please show me that there is background work that we have done of correlation and stuff. Basically, my takeaway would be, let us rethink how we are doing CS in the first place. Am I living in a matrix where I'm basically consuming the blue pill and I'm very happily, blissfully ignorant of the real path of it? Or am I going to actually be Neo and consume the red pill and take the uncomfortable reality what it is and then resolve it from there? That'll be my takeaway. Go back and ask, if you're CS, and look back and ask in CS, is it based on self-reported yes, no parameters, or is it based on really deep-rooted mathematical, scientific, statistical, machine learning-based models? If the answer is form or the latter, you have a problem, my friend. That's the takeaway that I would like to go back with.
Thank you for that. And if listeners are curious and wanted to find out more, where would you recommend they head to?
Well, there are lots of terrific resources out there. Some really good work that have come through in the last couple of years on this space. Of course, you can come and read our blogs on Zapscale. We have a whole bunch of stuff around there as well. But there are also some very cool CS folks who are now dabbling into the mathematical part of the whole thing very much. Look into that part. Of course, our blogs are one great way of going through all this process. We put them on together in one place for you to consume it from there. And you know what? Just be more open towards the fact that there is more math and science to this space than just like knowing the birth dates of your deal champions. That's what it is.
Manasij, thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate you taking the time out to have a chat with us.
Thanks a lot, Vinay. I had great fun here, and hopefully it was not terrible.